Hey, my name is Thomas and today there's my review of the Meyer-Optik Görlitz Primoplan 58mm f1.9, the world's first, well, one of the two first ever super fast standard prime lenses for 35mm SLR cameras. So let's have a go. Now the 1930s were a super interesting and significant time for camera history, especially in terms of 35mm cameras. We not only saw lights establish their Leica screw-mount rangefinder system on the market, and also Zeiss Econ come up with a super elaborate context rangefinder as well. Also the company IHG launched in 1936 the very first ever 35mm SLR system camera. So there also was a market emerging for interchangeable lenses for all these cameras. At the time Zeiss was the big player. They deliberately had bought out a lot of other competing companies to establish their leading role on the market, but some smaller companies were still active, such as Meyer-Optik Görlitz, and they were able in early 1936 to file a patent for the first Primoplan design. At the time it was still a 50mm lens. They later had to increase the focal length a little bit to 58. At the time you couldn't make a super fast 50 that had enough space between the rear lens element and the film to accommodate for the mirror box of the SLR cameras. Zeiss had the same problem. Their rangefinder 50s were real 50s, and when they did the Biotar for SLR, they also had to go to 58mm. It seems that Zeiss beat Meyer-Optik Görlitz just by a couple of months. Their Biotar lens hit the shelves already apparently very late in 36, whereas the Primoplan went on sale in early 1937. But that Meyer-Optik Görlitz was able to come up with such a cool lens design at all and have a success on the market was already a feat in itself. So today we live in a world of super fast and uber fast lenses that are very high quality, affordable to everyone, and come in many flavors. But in the 1930s an f1.9 or an f2 was really an accomplishment. It all started around 1922 when famous optical designer Ludwig Bertele presented the first Erno-Star lens. That was the first ever lens to make it possible to take candid shots, you know, low light shots, take pictures of photos, portraits without using a flash or a tripod or anything like that. And the famous photographer Erich Solomon made big use out of these lenses and took amazing portraits and photos of celebrities and politicians during the 1930s. He was killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz during the Second World War, but his work continues to impress up to this day. And that Erno-Star lens, it was made for a small medium format camera. That optical design led to all the other super fast lenses that would finally emerge around the 1930s. Ludwig Bertele, who constructed the Erno-Star, he ended up working for Zeiss, but the similar lens design was also modified by other companies, and this Meyer-Optik Görlitz 58mm Primoplan also is based basically on what was developed for the Anostar. This lens is only a 5 lens element design, so it's pretty basic and pretty simple. The Biogon already was a 6 lens element design, arguably had a better optical quality, but the unique Primoplan's design also creates its unique character. So there is a version 2 of this lens that is made since 2020 by a German company that also acquired the name rights for Meyer-Optik Görlitz again. 58 f1.9 Primoplan version 2 it is called. But this original lens, it was made from 1937, then there was maybe a break or a hiccup during the Second World War. It went into production after the war again until 1956 only. Then it was already phased out, and the reason back then was that this lens didn't have automatic aperture feature yet. The Eastern German photo industry introduced that very important feature with the Praktica FX2 and also some other cameras at the same time around 1956. But this lens has the problem that there is some focus shift when you stop down, so an automatic aperture feature didn't really work that well with this lens design, so it was replaced by more modern lens designs. This particular lens has got a preset aperture. I'm not sure if they all had it at the time. This is most likely a 1956, a very late production version. I love preset apertures because it makes it very easy to, you decide for an aperture before you take the shot. You can open the aperture to whatever value you want it to open, like fully open or maybe f2.8 to avoid focus shift or something. And then just after you focus, you just turn the ring until your desired aperture and shoot within a second. So that's very convenient, and it's the next best thing apart from fully automatic aperture, of course. From a modern perspective, in terms of sharpness, don't expect too much of this lens. Even in the 1930s, this wasn't the last word in sharpness or contrast. If you wanted that, you would just buy a Zeiss Tessar, for example, which is still a brilliant lens in that regard. But even in the 1930s, people were looking for more character in some lenses. There was the famous Leitz thumb bar, as you know, and other interesting lens designs that were all about anything but not about sharpness or contrast or something like that. And the Primoplan isn't a lens like the thumb bar. It is a lens that is capable of decent landscape shooting and stuff like that, but it's not really made for that. Keep that in mind. When you're shooting even at f4, you will have a pretty big area in your frame towards the borders and corners that is not really sharp. If you shoot a landscape, for example, you really want to close down to f8 or better even f11, and even then other lenses will just be a little bit better. This lens is about shooting it more wide open. At f1.9 it gives you this beautiful soap bubble like bokeh due to all the optical imperfections going on there. And this makes the character of this lens. It's lightweight, it's super simple to use. It has some quirks like, for example, the focus throw is massive, as you can see. It focuses down to 0.6 meters, and that's almost a 360 turn. On the other hand, it's super precise. It's got infinity, and then the first marking for is for 24 meters. Compare that to your average other lens. They will maybe have a marking saying 5 meters or something like that. The preset aperture I already mentioned is beautiful to handle. So overall, this is a very simple and easy to use lens. I throw in some night shots. I shoot most of them at f8 and f11. This lens performs perfectly there. Also, I shot a roll of color slide film, Fuji Velvia. Please don't look at the colors too closely. That's more my bad scanning skills when it comes to color slide film than anything else. This lens renders a little bit warm, as is maybe expected of such an old design, but it gives a fairly neutral representation of colors, and it's also pretty contrasty, especially when you have the sun in the back. The slides look basically the same as with any other 1970s or 1980s SLR camera. So in that regard, it's a pretty good lens even. So when it comes to the time for a verdict, as always with really classic and vintage equipment, it's sort of hard. You have to put it into context. You have to see it in perspective. This is an absolute super significant history item for photography, and it also gives a super unique rendering in some of photos. You take, let's say, 50 shots and then 5 of them you're like, wow. With any other lens I wouldn't have been able to get that shot and that way, and then the lens is already worth it all. In other circumstances you just take a shot and you're a little bit underwhelmed maybe. So it also depends on what you shoot. I think this thing should be amazing for portrait shooting, or if you just want to have this vintage sort of vibe, but it's not just vintage like in Instagram filter vintage. It's really supple and rich. It's a beautiful look. It's a look of a classic quality of rendering, and for that I really love this lens. If you would ask me to spend 900 euros on the new, more modern version, I have to admit I never shot that lens. I'm very happy with this classic version. I always believe in the original, but of course I super applaud that there is someone caring for that stuff and making it available for the photographic community. Again, many people don't want to go through the hassle of buying something that is 40, 50, or in this case even like 70 years old. You can end up with a lot of issues like, I don't know, haze elements, problems with focusing, sticky aperture blades, all that stuff. If you don't want that, if you want the modern version that does it all for you, just works and still is made beautifully and according to the classic formula, then go for the modern version 2 lens. But of course that's pretty expensive. But sometimes there are things that, you know, you can't just put into a price performance perspective. So overall, I love this lens. I'm very happy to have this in my collection. If you like this sort of stuff, I'm sure you will also love this lens. I hope you found this interesting and maybe even useful. If you did so, then please leave a like. Also subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so yet. It's a great support for my channel and I really appreciate it. Don't forget also to hit the small bell button so you get a notification whenever I upload my next video. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching Tom's Cameras. Live long and prosper. I hope you have a great time and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.